Thanks for listening to the AI for Sales podcast with host Chad Burmeister. This episode is brought to you by BDR.ai, Nooks.ai, and ZoomInfo, the go-to market intelligence platform. Nooks.ai is the agent workspace for intelligent outbound. By pairing human judgment with AI execution, reps focus on relationships, not busy work. Join Intercom, Deal, and over 1,200 customers who use Nooks AI dialing, coaching, or multi-channel AI sequencing to double their pipeline. And ZoomInfo gives your revenue teams the data and insights they need to find, engage, and win their best customers, helping you move faster, work smarter, and grow revenue at scale. Want an introduction to one of our sponsors? Head to www.scr.ai/intro and unlock your direct line to more closable pipeline, powered by AI. Until next time, keep leading the AI for sales revolution, and remember, in sales, time kills deals. But in AI for sales, AI kills time.
Welcome to the AI for Sales podcast. I'm Chad Burmeister, your host, and I'm very excited today because we have another .ai branded URL, which is the hottest thing in everywhere today. So looking forward to digging in. Rod May is the co-founder and CEO of Neurometric AI, a pioneering company optimizing inference for multimodal AI systems. Rob, I can't wait to dig in and understand what all that means. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
So much has changed with AI. Before we hit the record button, we were talking about how, it's been around 15, 20 years in its modern form. And before that, 50, 75 years AI has been around. But until the advent of ChatGPT and GPT, a lot of the general population really didn't know about what all this is. Can you talk to us just a little bit about your company and what's going on out there in the world of AI for you?
Yeah, it's an interesting time to be working in AI. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that in 1956, Marvin Minsky, who was a professor at MIT, gave a grad student the AI goal for the summer of solve machine vision, make computers identify images. And it took us until 2015 to actually be good for that. So good at that, right? So it's been a long slog, but man, we're in a really exciting time. And one of the things that led to the creation of Neurometric is the fact that there's so much AI adoption, right? Because what happens is when you build a new AI system, whether it's an agent or using it for marketing and sales materials or whatever you're doing, most people start with a frontier model. So OpenAI, Anthropic, Cohere, one of those services, and Gemini from Google maybe. And that is how you should start. You should keep it simple. So they start building stuff and they start using more AI, and those costs go from dollars a day to tens of dollars a day to hundreds of dollars a day. And they look around at some point and they go, wow, we're spending $100,000 a month on inference for AI. It seems like a lot of money, and it's growing at 40% month over month. So this is going to be in a bad spot soon. So when that happens, they come to us. And what we do is we look at the workloads that you have, right? What are the different tasks that you're doing with AI? And we tell you which of those tasks you actually need to send to a frontier model and which ones you don't. And then we provide simple, what we call task-specific endpoints. So simple small language models that do the one thing that you need them to do that you can hit for, $200 a month, $500 a month. So let's take a concrete example. Say you're spending $100,000 a month and $12,000 of it is on customer sentiment analysis of your support tickets. So you're analyzing your support tickets and you're asking OpenAI to send you, in general, break down how happy are people, whatnot, whatever. You do not need OpenAI to do that. Models have been able to do that for a while. You can take a smaller, cheaper model. I could probably build you a model that'll do that for $300 a month and save you, 10 or 12 grand. So those are the kinds of things that we do. Now, we can't do that for everything. There's some things that you need the frontier models to do because they have advanced capabilities. But we can do that for a lot of stuff. So yeah, that's the basis behind Neurometric.
Wow, that's pretty exciting. It totally makes sense to me because I just started building 2 apps myself on the weekend for forecasting and whatnot. And, I'm $300-$400 in on probably 10 or 12 hours worth of work for 2 different apps. And, I can see that that's just going to continue to rack up the dollar costs. And it's probably could be contained to a much simpler model. It doesn't need all that horsepower. So
yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. And I'm just but it's a good place to start. This is where you figure out what is the art of the possible. And then instead of exacerbating out to $100,000 a month spend, you say, hey, I can do this in a lot lower cost, or $12,000.
Exactly. Think about it the way you would think about hiring people, right? You start when your company's small, you hire a couple of generalists who can do all the stuff and they're pretty smart and they're pretty good at everything. And then you start hiring specialists for the areas you need them first a head of engineering, right? Then head of marketing and sales and like whatever. And then you get to the point where like, you don't need to take these like super smart rocket scientists that you work with and be like, hey, can you also do the bookkeeping? Because like you can just find somebody who is more cost effective to do that. And it's the same way with models, right? And you should always start with the general stuff and proof of concept, make sure that it works. But then when you get to the phase where you're like, wow, we should optimize, and so like for your business, I mean, what do most of us do? We hire a part-time bookkeeper initially, right? We do it ourselves, then we hire a part-time bookkeeper. When you have to get pretty big before you need your own full-time accountant on staff. But you eventually get there, and then you get to the point where you need teams of accountants. So AI models are the same way. Think of them like people.
Wow. Yeah, that's really cool. I like the analogy and the thought process here. Let's flip it. I like to kind of open the conversation around the transformation for the customer experience. So not just your customers, but your customer's customer that are experiencing communication with AI. How do you see their world transforming for the better?
Well, I actually think one of the things that we do, even though we talk about cost savings, the other benefit of using small models when you can is they are lightning fast. And they're fast because if you think of models as computer programs, ChatGPT is this giant bloated computer program that takes multiple computers to run. If you can run the task on a small model, it's a much better user experience. So one of the things people use small models for is if you're building an agentic workflow, and say that agentic workflow has 12 steps, and let's say you have to call the Claude Opus 4.6 API for each step, that could be on a bad day on the Claude API, that could be as much as like 28 to 30 seconds to do that agentic task. Now, if you could take 10 of those 12 steps and say, wow, small models that can run in 100 milliseconds would do that. Those 10 steps run in 1 second. Now you still have 2.5 to 3 seconds for the other ones, but you've taken a 30-second workflow and made it say like a 6 or 7 second workflow from an agent perspective. If that agent's doing something for your end user, that's a huge difference, right? That's the time between me being like, wait, is it doing something? Oh yeah, it's done, versus like, is it stuck? What's going on? And so it's yeah, I think small language models and a lot of this inference optimization is really going to improve the user experience around AI for all kinds of customers, but particularly for all these agentic workflows.
Are these small language models in the cloud still, or do they run on the local machine?
You can do either. I mean, we typically run them in the cloud, but depending on the size of device that you have and the memory capacity, it can run different size models. So if your users aren't familiar with the term parameters, models with more parameters are bigger and can typically do more things. So ChatGPT is like a multi-trillion parameter model. Anything that's like 2, 3, 400 billion parameters is considered pretty big. You could probably run a 8 billion parameter model on your phone, on like a high-end phone. You could probably run a 10, 12 billion parameter model on a laptop, maybe 20 billion on a high-end laptop. But you get down to like AI-powered washing machines and refrigerators, different devices on cars. Like you have to run a 200 million or maybe billion parameter model. So you have to run these. So the memory capacity of the device dictates the size of model that you can run on it. So in a lot of cases, yeah, they are run locally on devices, but it's much harder.
It reminds me of a conversation I had probably 5 years ago, within the year or two of the time this podcast launched, with someone who's deploying AI to drive through restaurants, the McDonald's and the Taco Bells of the year. And he said, if you relied on the large language model, then to your point, hey, would you like fries with that? And then 30 seconds later, it's like,
yeah,
oh, yeah, you don't have the time to wait. So they had to figure out a way to bring it down to the local machine, or to your point, cloud, but just with this much smaller model, so that they could collapse the time from, I would like fries with my with my Big Mac.
Yeah, and you can fine tune these models on your use case. So if you had a restaurant use case, you could take a mid-tier model, fine tune it around restaurant ordering, and you're like, you don't need it to know the history of Rome and how to diagnose your X-ray and all this other stuff that ChatGPT knows. You just need it to know the things that it needs to do. So that's one way to think of it.
Wow, that makes sense. Talk to me about a case study of where maybe you've worked with one of these companies, and usually you probably can't share the name, perhaps, but maybe you can tell the case study of it anyway.
Yeah, so I'll give you a really good example. We had a company that was analyzing a lot of e-commerce documents, right? Because they were looking to buy or invest in some of these e-commerce companies, and so one of the things they wanted to do was they wanted to take pages and pages, thousands of pages of documents about these companies, and be able to build a knowledge graph that connected the products and the customers in ways where then they could ask questions out of that knowledge graph. So they were sending all this to one of the advanced OpenAI models, and it wasn't even a cost thing for them. It was a time thing, which is it took almost a day to process, say, 4,000 pages on average. So they asked us to take a look, and we took their workflows and we ran it on this. We have this giant engineering harness that can run on lots of models and provide results. We ran it on a bunch of models, and we came back and we said, hey, here's a model called Llama 4 Maverick, and it looks like it's about 10 times faster, and speed is what you care about. So why don't you try it? Why is it 10 times faster? We don't totally know. These models, they're trained on so much data and all this kind of stuff, but they have minor nuances in how the data is fed to them, and their slight architectures, how they're configured. And those nuances translate into weird variabilities sometimes, right? And things that they're good at and things they're not. So anyway, so that's why we test them. And so we made this recommendation to the customer, and they came back and they were like, wow, they implemented it. And they're like, it's 10 times faster and 4 times cheaper to do. And this was a core workflow for them. So then they start looking at like, wow, what are some other slow or expensive workflows we can give you guys to test? And that's the phase that we're in now.
Wow. I mean, this is the first time I'm hearing of this type of solution. So I think the market probably doesn't have a whole lot of competition in this market.
Yeah, no, it's pretty. So part of the reason that it's a nascent market is because there aren't many people spending so much on AI yet that they're worried about it. But it's picking up, right? You might have seen on LinkedIn the last couple of weeks, Uber's CTO talked about how they have to move off of Claude Code because they were in April and they'd already blown through their budget for the year. So people are
Wow.
starting to think about this, but it's only the people that are big companies with really heavy AI usage.
Sure. I mean, it reminds me of WebEx back in the day when WebEx was pre Cisco acquisition. I was there 2005, and we used to sell on minutes when I first started, and it was
Yeah.
25 to 33 cents a minute. And we were going after travel. So, hey, would you rather spend 18 bucks for a meeting or have the person fly on an airplane to go
Yeah.
spend all the travel?
Yeah.
And so
And
it
get a
was a very,
hotel and it's $1,000.
yeah.
Yeah.
But then as minutes started to add up, then we sold ports and then we converted over to the name user model. And all of what we're talking about here reminds me of, hey, these tokens are going to go through the roof for a while. And then people are going to have to start figuring out, well, how do I get this down into a more cost effective mechanism? And you've delivered that.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. What about AI misconceptions in the market? To me, it seems like for about 6 months to a year there, everyone thought that it was done and that we don't need people anymore. And I think
Yeah.
that is the biggest fallacies that's been kind of washed away over the last year.
Yeah. So I'll give you two misconceptions actually. One related to our business and one that's more general AI related. I think on the general side, I think the point that you make is correct. I think people thought, wow, in a year, you're not going to need humans anymore. And we're actually seeing the opposite. Yes, there are some jobs that are going to go away and be reshaped. But the general thing is if suddenly one engineer can do the work that used to take 5 engineers, that just means now you need 4 more product managers, right? Because that's the new bottleneck. Like if you want to take advantage of that, right? And when AI can do the work of product managers, then you're going to need that many more salespeople. When AI can, you're going to. So you still need a lot of people to decide what to build and how to build it and coordinate and all that. Actually, executing on the thing is much easier. But like anything else, when doing it becomes cheap and easy, people just do a lot more of it, and so you're going to see a lot more software built at all kinds of companies. And that's going to need to be managed and maintained, and people need to decide what it is. And so that's one thing that's been a misconception. I think a more specific misconception, like in our industry, is people don't understand model capabilities very well. So they assume that like, well, a small model can't do what I need. The way to think about a small model is ChatGPT has 1 trillion parameters. This model has 10 billion parameters. can the thing you need to be done fit in the 10 billion? If so, then this will do it just as well, maybe even better than ChatGPT, because that's all it does. It is a tiny expert in one thing, whereas ChatGPT has to be an expert in many things because it's like a conversational search tool. And so I think people are surprised a lot of times about the fact that these small models will work well. And it's like, yeah, any high volume workloads you have should go to small models.
Nooks.ai is the agent workspace for intelligent outbound. By pairing human judgment with AI execution, reps focus on relationships, not busy work. Join Intercom, Deal, and over 1,200 customers who use Nooks AI dialing, coaching, or multi-channel AI sequencing to double their pipeline.
They can do them as good as the big models. So,
well, and then what about when you talk about small model versus big model, I would guess that a side benefit would be it's also a private model, because part of the problem with the large players is once you put your book out there or your intellectual property, well, it's now part of the LLM.
Yeah. Even if you have an enterprise account where they don't train on your data, they still see your use cases, right? That's why Anthropic came out with Claude Code, because they saw that the most successful app users were using Claude before Claude Code was there. They were using it, like your Cursor and those companies were using it to build coding tools. And they went, that's interesting. Maybe we should build our own coding tool. In some sense, it's a classic vertical integration play, right? I mean, Trader Joe's does this all the time, right? They're buying food and selling it, and they're like, well, that's really popular. Maybe we should just make our own Cheerios or yogurt or whatever they make. And so it's a common business strategy, but I think the difference is in a world where you're giving out a bunch of your core intellectual IP, which is kind of what AI does sometimes. I think you have to be more careful about it. So yeah, it's definitely something that people like about small language models. They can be private. They're easier to run on older hardware that you might have. You don't need a Blackwell GPU. So there's a lot of benefits around data sovereignty and privacy. Yeah.
Talk to me about the relationship between human and AI. In the sales motion, I often talk about if you're going to use AI to do your prospecting with you and for you, how do you bring the human in? In your world, it's, how do humans and AI interact efficiently, I guess?
Yeah, I think you're going to see for quite some time humans act at multiple levels, but I think people are going to become more like managers, which is good, right? It's good, but it's hard for a young person, I think, to learn that managerial skill set. For those of us that have managed people for a while, yeah, now that person's an agent and whatever, it's fine. But it takes a while to get to a point in your career where you have to decide, because early in your career, people tell you what to do and you do it. And then as you get better, people tell you like general direction and you figure out how to do it and you go do it. But then you hit a point in your career where you're the person who like, I have to decide what we're going to do next out of all the possible projects and things. What are we going to take on? What are we going to pursue? And now you have to get there faster with AI, right? But I think you're still going to need a lot of that. So I think you're going to need humans for a lot of oversight, a lot of spot checking and double checking of things. And then there's just some things, there was a company in Y Combinator, I think, that launched a human API, which allows agents to call and ask a human to do a task that the agents can't do. So it'd be interesting to see how that works out.
Wow. Yeah, very interesting times, that's for sure. What about as a CEO and founder of a business? I'm sure you get approached from time to time about new technologies. Is there anything out there that you're seeing on the horizon that looks interesting?
I am really interested in this emerging field that they call harness engineering. And the reason I'm interested in it is because you can think of the harness as the thing the model plugs into. And the reason that harness engineering has become so interesting is because a harness can define as the environment that the model runs in. The harness can help define the task, the structure of that task, the guardrails around that task. And I think, there's some companies people trying to figure out what harness engineering looks like, because it's only a couple months old as a concept, but it's like, are there going to be companies that provide harness engineering tools for everybody? Are we all going to write our own? I don't know, but I'm very excited about where this could go, because it means you could take the same model and use it in two different situations, and it could perform slightly differently because of the rules imposed on it by the harness. So I think it's going to solve a lot of the problems with the open-ended models that we've had. From a small model perspective, it helped. One of the problems with small models is they forget they're smaller, they have less memory, they lose track of what they're doing. But if you put them in a nice harness and you're like, the harness defines the steps, because it's a repetitive workflow, they can outperform the big models. So really excited about harness engineering and where that could go.
I've been working in information and data for the last 2 years, and data governance, master data management, data integration from all the disparate systems. That's what comes to mind when you talk about this harnessing concept, because if you put the guardrails in place, it avoids the hallucinations, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I've been saying, once that comes to the LLMs, and maybe it doesn't, maybe it comes to the small language models like you're talking about, that's where you can have governance. And I was just telling a friend of mine who's in M&A space, when that comes out, the world's going to change in a big way, because right now the general user can't experience what enterprises can, because they don't have the guardrails. If you're able to bring the guardrails to them through what I think you're talking about with harnessing, I think that solves a big problem. Very interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
What about the ethical side? I've had some really interesting and good conversations. About 2-3 episodes ago, a lawyer from New York, when I asked who's responsible for the ethical consideration, he said, "Oh, the user." And that was the very first time that I've actually heard that. He said, "Think about it. When you get behind a car, is it the manufacturer of the car did we get in trouble if you ran into somebody? No, it'd be the driver of the car." So it really added some unique perspective for me. Any other thoughts on the ethical side of this whole AI thing? Who's responsible, and what do we need to think about?
I think it's going to be, so the interesting thing to me about AI and sales and the ethical considerations are when you're trying to persuade humans of something, right? There's sort of two perceptions of sales. Like the people that do it a lot of times just have this point of view where you're like, look, I'm trying to, it's an evaluation process. I'm trying to evaluate, do you have a problem that I can solve? And if not, I'm moving on, whatever. There's a school of people that believe it's a persuasion process about convincing you want something, whether you need it or not. Right. And I would argue that's bad sales, but it happens. This is why you have the idea of the shady used car salesman from the 1980s. Right. So what's really interesting is, if AI is one of the smartest tools ever invented, can it be used to persuade people to do things they otherwise wouldn't do? And then is that a good or a bad thing? Is it like, well, if it's still your choice, you still have free will and whatever, or is this like, no, I've got the ultimate trick up my sleeve where I know what to say to you because I have this AI that's doing it to 100 million people a day and it's the best in the world at persuading people. I think you get into some issues like that. And you see this in some industries where they have cooling off periods, right? Like if you go to buy a franchise and you go hear the pitch, they make you wait 7 days before you can sign up, right? And so there are industries like that where they stop you from getting too riled up and putting pressure on and making major decisions. So be interesting to see if this gets resolved, like if the industry sort of self-regulates, or maybe we never build, maybe AI is not that persuasive, maybe it's not something it can do, or maybe there has to be some legislation that's passed. I don't know, but definitely a lot of issues in there.
Yeah, I love what you just talked about, because I took neuro-linguistic programming for 18 months in a master class. And I was thinking, if that made its way into the AI, like as a human, I can only adopt so much of that. Like I might, use the best, forget the rest, and only adopt 15%. But if you had an AI that could adopt 100% of where are your eyes looking, what language are you using, are you a see, hear, or feel type person? If you could match the communicator with the receiver at scale, look out, world.
Well, yeah, right. And so it's interesting. Now you could argue that it works against you at some level. So I'll give you an example. Harvard in like 2014 or 2015 started running a class on how to optimize your dating profile for online dating. And when I was recently divorced, a friend of mine who had taken that class was like, "Oh, let me show you how to optimize your profile. Here are the things you're supposed to say. Here are the things that people want to hear you say." So I'm like, "Oh, great." It actually works against you because you have a limited amount of time. So what it means is you get a lot more matches and you go on a lot more dates, but there's a lot of people that you're not matched with. So you're artificially matching with people that you otherwise wouldn't be a good match with, right? And so from a sales perspective, like you could be overly persuasive and then have a churn problem on the other side, right? Because you convince people to buy something that really wasn't a good fit for them. And I would argue that
Yes.
a good sales process is about finding the people who have the problem you solve, not convincing people to buy something they don't want.
Yeah,
Right? So,
I love this conversation. You're dead on because just because you convince them to buy something, it's like spin selling. I remember when I read
yeah,
that way back in the day, it was like if you're trying to sell a watch for $100 and you can't let them leave because if they leave, then you're never going to sell them the watch. That's okay. It's $100.
yeah,
But if you're selling them a $50,000 piece of software and you convinced someone to do something they wouldn't otherwise do, then that's a problem.
yeah,
Even a
yeah.
$1,000 piece of software. Wow. Well, I really enjoyed the conversation. Last question for you is, you're deep into this AI world as the co-founder and CEO of Neurometric. It's just built into the name of your company,
Yeah.
Neurometric AI. It took you a while probably to get to where you are. What advice would you give to people who are at the beginning end of where you once were?
I think the biggest thing you have to do in your career is find some way to stand out. And there's lots of ways to do that. And I don't think it matters which of those you choose. But, if you can, so like I hired a person for Neurometric who was right out of college, and that's a hard time to find a job. But she had done such a good job of organizing like groups and had started a club and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, wow, you did the whole like women in AI thing for Boston it's like very impressive to do that at 21 years old. um, and so I think if you can, and it takes a lot of drive to do that because you're going to do some events and people aren't going to show up and you're going to have to keep at it. And that anything you can do to show that commitment and that discipline and that like, I'm going to keep doing this until I figure it out, until I, build my list and, and so whether it's writing, whether it's, whether it's having something really unique about yourself, like, you're a marketing person, but you go really deep in this one thing that most marketing people don't, right? Like that's super cool. And so, yeah, find some way to stand out. And then the second thing would just be experiment like heck with all these AI tools because you really, they're changing so fast. You just kind of have to get your hands dirty and try stuff and it's messy and whatever, but it's all you can do.
Yeah, and it's fun. I mean, it's a lot of fun. Well, Rob, really appreciate you being on. If people want to reach out to you, what would be a good way to get in touch with you?
They can always email me, rob@neurometric.ai. I also write a newsletter on investing in AI at investinginai.substack.com. So yeah, you can follow along with my ideas.
Awesome. I'm going to check it out myself personally. So thank you so much for being on the show today, Rob.
All right. Thanks for having me, Chad.
All right, everyone. Thanks for joining another AI for Sales podcast.
Thanks for listening to the AI for Sales podcast with host Chad Burmeister. This episode was brought to you by BDR.ai, Nooks.ai, and ZoomInfo, the go-to market intelligence platform. Nooks.ai is the agent workspace for intelligent outbound. By pairing human judgment with AI execution, reps focus on relationships, not busy work. Join HubSpot, Deal, and over 1,200 customers who use Nook's multi-channel AI sequencing to double their pipeline. And ZoomInfo gives your revenue teams the data and insights they need to find, engage, and win their best customers, helping you move faster, work smarter, and grow revenue at scale. Want an introduction to one of our sponsors? Head to www.scr.ai/intro and unlock your direct line to more closable pipeline, powered by AI. Until next time, keep leading the AI for sales revolution, and remember, in sales, time kills deals. But in AI for sales, AI kills time.